Okay, hi everyone. Welcome. We're just going to give a few seconds here for others to join as the link just went live. We're super excited to have you join us today from wherever you are in the world. I'm currently in Canada, centered in Toronto today, but as Jenny knows, I sit all over the place in Canada. So maybe we can get going here as people have started joining. So thanks again, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live session. So I'm Sabrina Fitzgerald. I am our National Leader of Private Clients at PwC Canada and PwC's Global Startup and Scale-Up Leader. And I'm going to be your host today. I'm delighted to be joined by both PwC colleagues as well as 3 female founders to discuss the findings of a report that we published around International Women's Day in March this year. The report highlighted the unique challenges faced by female founders and also shared 5 ways to overcome these challenges. You may or may not have read the report, but we're here to help decipher the report for you. So let's start hearing about the report from my colleague, Jenny Chance, who will then discuss key findings, and then we will discuss the key findings with our panelists here.
Thank you, Sabrina. I'm so pleased that we're here today and joined by 3 really inspiring women, of course, alongside Sabrina, who I work with in the Global Startup Scale-Up Network at PwC. Just to provide some context to the report, and you can see the report in the notes that we've posted, the statistic that kind of inspired us to do this research was that in 2020, less than 3% of global VC funding went to female-founded businesses. And that, sadly, has not changed in the 3 years since then. So we wanted to get behind these statistics and understand the challenges that female founders were facing, but most importantly, how they were overcoming them. And so today we've got 3 women on the call who have all successfully raised funding. And some of them took part in the research that we ran earlier this year, and as Sabrina said, posted on International Women's Day. And we interviewed 40 female founders in 25 different countries. They'd raised from seed funding right the way through to Series D, so hundreds of millions of dollars between them. They're in a range of founding teams, so solo female founders, female co-founders, and male and female co-founders. We had some really inspiring conversations, but we also heard some really terrible stories of sexism, unconscious bias, and some really just awful stories that some of them had endured. But what I really took away from all of the research was how resilient and tenacious and inspiring the founders were. And so we wanted to contribute positively to this debate. And so the report focuses on the recommendations that we took from all of these women that we interviewed about how other female founders can overcome the challenges and successfully raise funding. So that really we live in a world where the best startup gets funded and not just the ones that get run by the right person. So Sabrina, I'll pass back to you to talk to these really inspiring women who are so thankful and grateful they could join us today.
That's awesome.
Jenny,
Thanks, Jenny.
Just going to add, maybe not the right person, but the right person of the right gender.
Absolutely. The right gender, the right person, the right startup with the right idea.
Yeah.
All of those things. Great. Thanks so much, Jenny, for sharing those highlights of the findings. I think that's important to set the stage for us today. So let's move into our panel. As Jenny said, we have a powerhouse of panelists here today, so I'm super excited. What I thought I'd do is if each of you could introduce yourselves and answer this first question, that would be awesome. And then our audience knows who you are. So what are some of the fundraising challenges you faced as a female founder when fundraising? And maybe I'll start with you.
Great. Thanks for having me today. Yes, I'm Somaye. I'm the CEO of Urban Chain. Urban Chain is an energy tech company creating peer-to-peer markets. And we just raised our Series A. I would say, to answer your question, is that the male counterparts of me raised funding much quicker than us. So initially, in the early stages, we had about 4 or 5 lines of businesses that they were doing this, things in the same area. They could raise much quicker than us, and we raised 3-4 years later, which was can be the case for us to be 2 female founders plus a male founder in our company.
Mm-hmm. Great. Romana, maybe we'll go over to you.
Yes, hi, thanks everyone. Really amazing to be here with everyone today. I'm Romana Dada. I'm the head of the Middle East Ventures team. So whilst I now sit on the other side of the table, investing and supporting founders, I actually come from a multiple, or let's call it serial entrepreneur. So pedigree of founding, building and growing companies. And so the challenges that we're going to talk about today are extremely relevant to me personally. I've raised 3 rounds of funding for my first business and then 2 rounds of funding for my second. So very familiar. I think, unfortunately, to start with a really stark story, but when I started one of my first, let's say, high growth scale up startups, I had a baby of around a year old. And unfortunately, one of the first meetings that I'd had with a PE firm was where I was told, subsequent to being interrogated for 10 hours across 2 global offices, not from the teams themselves, but from an outsider, that I wasn't invested in because I was a young mother, and that therefore there was no way that I could make it. So that's, real evidence that there really is bias, or was bias. I mean, my story was 12 years ago. Unfortunately, I still hear it coming back. But for me, having a young child, being a female, has always been something I've been challenged with. We also face, right, unfortunately, the issue of men being the majority of decision makers. And what that means is that therefore, when you walk into a room, especially as a sole founder, as a woman, you're open to feeling like you can be very easily taken advantage of. So some of the things we'll talk about today are how to avoid that, how to make sure that, you maintain control, you select the investors that you want on your table, and you due diligence them as much as they need to due diligence you to be sure that's the right person that you want to spend time with.
Great. Thanks, Romana. And Claire, over to you.
Hi, it's such a pleasure to be on this call, and thank you for having me, and great to speak to all of you. So my name is Claire. I run an ag tech company in Kenya. We aggregate imperfect and surplus produce from farmers, have built a platform around it, and have created a new market on our way to carbon certification. So it's very exciting. We have also seen, when you look at the statistics, and especially in Africa, the trend is actually declining. So last year it went less than 1% of VC funding went to female founders, all female teams. So and it's 16% to mixed teams, something like that. So you can really see a declining trend when there's an illusion that if you're a female founder, everyone wants to invest with a gender lens. And what I have seen is that those investors that I speak to that have this gender lens also ask very biased questions. But it's also this bias that I had to learn to see, because you don't always see it, that the questions you get are very risk related. I was really interesting, and I would like to just tell this story because I was in a session with Village Capital. This was more than 6 months ago. So we're there at a festival, and they said, they put a list of questions of risk-related questions and growth-related questions. And that's when they said, the majority of questions that male founders get are growth-related questions. And the majority of questions that women get are risk-related questions. And it was the first time that I saw really clearly that I had never gotten a growth question from the list of questions, that all the questions I was getting was in the risk-related questions. And it was the first time I realized the difference. And it was actually a male founder sitting next to me. And he said, yes, I've never gotten a risk-related question. And we were in the same sector, also in Africa. So that's the first time that I realized, okay, this bias that I do believe is in men and in women, right? I don't want to say that it's only a male problem. I believe that, women have that as well. So that it's just in our society. So I think that's something that's really important to really understand as a female founder. What is a risk-related questions? And if you're getting 100% risk-related questions, what do you do to turn that around? Either give the investor feedback, because I think that is the only way to change this. Investors have to understand when they are making a document that's only risk-related, and when it's growth-related. So I think that is something that I really saw clearly.
Yeah, no, that's great. I love the story too, Claire. It actually, it puts it into perspective, and I'm going to pay attention to it too, because I'm not sure that it's just a founder thing, right? It might just be a bias that we have generally as the two genders. Okay, so what did you think of the report? So maybe I'll ask each of you this question, but what did you think of the report? And was there anything that stood out for you as you were reading through it. And maybe I'll go in reverse order here. So maybe Claire, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think there's obviously the anecdotes in the reports. I mean, they fuel my my passion around this topic, because a lot of the stories were really real. What, you know, and I do want to link this because I see that's happening all the time, is that some of the things in there is also what I would like to avoid is that, you know, what should women do to change this? And what I really want to avoid is we cannot put the onus on women, right? It's a systematic problem that we're facing. So all my advice going forward, I really want to talk about, you know, avoiding what can change, what should we change in our behavior? Because I've gotten advice, someone saying, because I said, okay, how can I fundraise? They said, pitch to the male ego, or inflate your numbers, or talk loud, or talk deep, or, you know, and those are just, that is not going to, that might change it for me as an individual case. That's not going to move the needle from 1% to 2%. So I would really like to think about also systematic, like how can we as founders, or as, you know, PwC, who's a little bit on the other side and maybe also a neutral position, how can we change the system? What are things that we need to do? Yes, as a founder, you need to recognize how you can play the investor in front of you and make them see what they're doing. But yeah, so it's really about taking the onus away from women.
Great, thanks. Romana.
Yeah, so I mean, I actually thought the report was really, you know, well structured. It highlights 5, you know, really clear ways that you can help yourself on this journey. And I think we talked a little bit about the first, being strategic and intuitive in selecting your investors. I think that for me was, as I mentioned, really important. Like due diligence, your investors, get to know them. And this is one of the reasons that we say really early on, build relationships with investors even when you don't need their money. I mean, there's a famous story of Starbucks having raised their first capital, and it was just sitting in a cafe, and the original founder, and the name wasn't even Starbucks, was just having a chat with a gentleman about his idea, and it wasn't to pitch. Just remember that, you know, every relationship isn't about pitching, and sometimes we get caught into this feeling that we're always having to pitch, but it's just building relationships that might at some point become really relevant. Get to know those people, just like you would in a relationship, right? You're going to spend a long time with this person. You need to make sure you're comfortable, that you trust each other. A bad investor, and I've had one, can absolutely destroy your business, can cause you catastrophic damage. So that to me is really important. And I think some of the other points, you know, there was one in particular that highlighted for me, which was blending we wrote it as blending the best traits typically associated with men and women. Well, I would actually say it's a little bit different to that. And what it is for me is it is down to confidence, right? Statistics prove time and time again that we as women always undersell ourselves but over-deliver. However, men overpromise, and generally the consistency is that they can't deliver to the level that they overpromise. So why is it that we as women are always underselling ourselves? Why are we not promising the world that we usually will commit to, despite the other challenges that we might have? And again, we'll probably come to that a little bit later. So for me, it's being confident, demonstrating that you are in control, that you have the ability, the vision to be able to execute this. And sometimes you are questioned about, and particularly I'd say for women who have children or a family, it's, if that question comes up, although I hope it doesn't, if it does, and there are any questions that come up around your capacity, your commitment, I would always bring back the clear statistics and research that demonstrates that VC-backed companies with female founders perform 60% better, 63% better than companies with all male founders in terms of return of investment. Diversity delivers increased revenue. It's proven time and time again. And that shift has been seen, you know, even at large S&P 500 public companies, right? Goldman Sachs even drove, right, the mandate to have more women on boards. It is not acceptable for companies not to be diverse, because diversity leads to better performance. You know, another really stark statistic I always think about when people talk about it, which is that we as women make up 50% of the population, but only 11% of the decision makers are women in the world in finance. And that to me is, again, insane. They're making decisions about how we live, what we do. And yet we absolutely don't recognize more women. So I think the only thing for me that wasn't highlighted in this, which we are working on, and I think will come up in other reports, is the fact that we need to shift the dynamic a little bit, like Claire said, towards more women decision makers. And a lot of us are doing that. We're parts of, angel groups, investor groups that are helping to encourage more women to come to the table. I'm part of the 2022 Female Angel Movement, which I founded. I'm part of the original Women's Venture Fund, and bringing more women to the investor table will hopefully change that dynamic.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Romana. May, over to you.
Great report, to be honest. I really enjoyed reading it. One thing which resonated with me a lot, and also I have a quite bittersweet feeling about it, is that terminology of female tax on that report. It is true, but it's very unfair. So for me, like being female, because I'm female and I'm saying something, it's not valid. And then another male colleague saying the same thing is a valid point, and I should pay tax for it as a female tax, because I need to prove longer to that what I'm saying is right, is a bit quite difficult. But I would say one thing about me, one thing I would add is that if you believe on what you're doing, and that has been my approach, if you believe in what you're doing and you think you are developing something good, first of all, not all male colleagues have this quite like closed mindset. Many have growth mindset. So get them around you, and then just ignore the others. That has been my attitude. Just ignore the others and just keep going. And you get where you get because you have the people with growth mindset around you, and you have the people which they don't think about, okay, there's a gender bias here, female, male situation.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, if that's okay. I think what's really, and I think what was just been said, but I want to reiterate it. I think what indeed what it says is, create networks, right, in the report. Because just another story is that, I sometimes get emails from investors saying, listen, we are really focused on female founders, but we can't find them, which is always like a little bit strange. It just means that they're not in those networks. Or journalists saying, I want to interview, and they're just not in those networks. So it is about, I see my brother or my husband, they're always, at the bar networking in a way, talking about their businesses. I think that's just really important. Creating a network that is also very much business related, putting it together, organize events where you invite investors in, organize, make sure that as a group you're visible, because that's how you get in, and that's how you get more leads, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure, one, tap into other networks, mixed networks, but also really create female networks. I don't think we should be on an island talking with women about this problem. We really have to break open this dialogue as well.
Yeah, a good reminder, Claire, actually, thanks for that. We talked a little bit, Romana, about confidence, and confidence and self-belief are both important components of pitching successfully. When founders, with founders saying that everyone has an opinion on what you should change and how you should be. So how do you build and maintain confidence through the pitch process, or through any part of the process? And Romana, you talked about confidence, so maybe I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's one of those things. If you're going to put yourself out there to become a founder of a company, you're going to face many challenges, and confidence really should not be one of them. So I'd have to say that this is really not so much about what you can do to keep it up, but it's more about you as yourself need to know, when you decide to embark on the journey as a startup founder, that this is going to be a tough journey. It isn't for everyone. And I think this is something that we have popularized, right? The culture of startups, we've made it so glamorous, and we've made it out to be the thing that everyone wants to do. But I think, and it's something I also advocate for as a 3 times, founder, and having gone through the energy that takes, it's not always the right path for you. If you have, a young family, if you have a lot of other responsibilities, you have to be prepared that being a startup founder could mean that you're going to make a lot of sacrifices. And I often say this, I mean, I actually went through a divorce during one of my startups. It was a sacrifice. And for us, it was very clear that the hours and the time was not suitable for my lifestyle. Some people make it happen, and they're in great relationships which can accommodate it, but it isn't for everyone. If you are, however, prepared to go through that journey, you have to be confident. You have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe in your vision. If you don't believe in your vision and your product, how can you expect somebody else to believe in it? So I think it really comes down to you. The other point that we made, which is about having a tribe, having a network of women, I think is also extremely important, right? Those women can become that support system. And actually extending to that, a point that I wrote I wanted to bring up is that as women, right, we do have other responsibilities, especially if you choose to have a family. And therefore, it often makes sense to co-found with a fellow woman. I don't think we do that enough. I don't think we connect. And there are great organizations like, for example, Antler, which specifically focus on creating that kind of serendipity amongst founders and groups. And I think if we as women stood together and supported each other when we had ideas that were similar to each other and brought them together to have a smaller piece of a bigger pie, as I always say it, but create something that's much, much bigger and have more impact together, for me, that's always the way. So I really, really advise people to open their minds, to talk to more people, to build a tribe, to build a community, to attend more events, to build a friendship tribe of women in the community who can support and maybe collaborate together to create something.
Great. So I guess, I don't know, Claire or Mai, if you have a confidence story that you wanted to share too, or if you have some commentary on the question I just asked, Romana.
Yes,
Mai?
confidence is sorry, Claire. Confidence is quite, yes, it's definitely something that you should have in and believe in what you are doing. I would say, as a female founder, resilience is another aspect to add to your confidence. So it's not just believing in what you're doing, and also, Romana is right. Is it something for you? I go a bit further in terms of details. Is the sector for you? Sometimes some sectors are much more female oriented than some sectors. So look at your skill sets. Which sector is best match your kind of experience, your resilience? No, I'm not saying people have, if somebody is working in the male dominated environment has more resilience. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying, are you ready for those like big fights in the car, like those environments? Or do you want to take it much slower? Which is fine. Everybody needs everything, and that's something that we can look at instead of like just thinking about, okay, where just as a kind of like saying, okay, by default I'm going here this way. And that's I would say.
Samir, just to add to that, when you say resilience, it brings me to another point that came up in the report, which I think is really important, and that's criticism. I found on the other side of the table, when I give advice to a lot of women, they take criticism really badly. It's just generally, I've seen it happen time and time again. And if you are a founder, again, in the report, we talk about personifying the business. Whenever I've had businesses, I've always referred to myself as we, and people always, and I think I've automatically personified myself into the business. Therefore, I don't take it personally. If you think this business model doesn't work, you're telling me because you want me to be successful. You've seen other models that work and you know this might not work, or you think I should shift. Now, as entrepreneurs ourselves, I'm sure Claire and Samir, you can agree, how many times have we pivoted our business model? What we started with is never what we end up. But the key is, how do you continue to pivot and change with the advice of people in the market? Listen to people, take their experience, take their advice, which also feeds into just one more point that I'll mention that we brought up, which is mentors. One of the best things that anyone can do is get excellent mentors, any gender, but get people who support you, who believe in you, and who actually have deep expertise in the sector in which you're focusing on. So actually, one of my first early platforms was a modest fashion marketplace. We had over 350 brands from around the world. It was kind of one of the first of its time 12 years ago. For any of you who know the industry, you'll have seen Lindsay Lohan famously wore a hijab at one of our major events at the Saatchi Gallery in London. So it was a really big affair. And during that process, I had the Moda Operandi, which was at the time, for those of you know, one of America's biggest kind of platforms, kind of when Farfetch and Net-a-Porter were emerging. And he was the CTO of that platform. And he was one of my advisors. And the expertise and advice he gave me on technical things, because I wasn't a technology person in those days, was invaluable, honestly. And then one of my second startups was a children's ed tech. And I had the CEO of YouTube Kids as one of my advisors. Again, incredible insight. So Pick, and don't be scared. By the way, this is another thing we as women do. We're afraid of asking. We're afraid of going out there and putting ourselves out there. Go out there, go onto LinkedIn, connect to like the dream person. Who's the dream mentor, the ChatGPT founder? Why do you think he's not available for you? You never know. The only thing that can happen is you'll get a no. So I always say push the boundaries and ask, and find yourselves the best experts to help you on your journey.
Great advice.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree with pushing the boundaries, but I do want to reiterate something. I think what you're saying, Romana, is really true, where everyone is different. And we often say, women, this is the behavior I think part of that is true, but I do think the main problem lies in the bias of men and women both, right? I'm not saying, because I really don't want to do, men are the only one who's biased. I'm biased as well. I can share many examples how I'm biased when I sit in a cafe and I see a man working behind his laptop who has a beard and is middle-aged. I think he's the leader of a company. Whereas I see a woman who's middle-aged working behind a laptop, I might think that she's a writer. So the bias just lives in all of us. So I just think we have to be super aware. And I think I would really like to change this space. I would like to change this for my daughter, and I'm really passionate about it. So I would like to drive the point home. And really, when I talk to investors, I do try to say the same thing, that I'm passionate about this thing. And I do think, just because I know we have 4 minutes left, I would really like to say to women fundraising that, ask for feedback and make sure that the feedback is valid. So when they say no, make sure that what you're getting, and that drive the point home that it's detailed, because scalability and defensibility, and there's a couple of these that are usually sort of similar, that women get, or, there's not enough growth market. Just make sure it's really detailed so you can do something about it. So like Romana said, you can pivot and change your business model. I think it's really important, go heavy on all the growth opportunities in your pitch deck. You might be getting a lot of risk questions, but doesn't mean that you should flood your pitch deck with how to address those points because you keep on getting it. Counter it with everything you're not being asked so that they see that opportunity. And lastly, don't waste time on investors. Make sure you do DD, and also ask other female founders if they've spoken to these and what their track record is. I've been asking that. What is their track record really in terms of investing in women? And if they have done 40 deals and 0 of them are female, then that list is going around. That information is out there, and that should become public. We're not ready because that's a very unpopular opinion, but at some point that will become public, just like how many women are there on boards of companies. And I think, lastly, I think I reiterated, I do think build networks, build women networks, and tap into networks. And I think that's been repeated.
Yeah, what awesome advice from all of you, actually. So thank you for that. I'll take nuggets of all of that as takeaways. Some things I wrote down. I loved the description between risk and growth. Claire, I think that really will hold true with this audience here. I think the diversity delivers, Romana. That's a strong message that all 4 of us actually really feel is true. And I would say tribe, a network of women. Find your tribe, have a network of women. That resonated from each of you. So thanks for that. And
maybe one last one just before we close up also is keep it simple and apply the same rules. Men and women, we have the same rules. And sometimes, and this comes up a lot, is that we as women, because we're passionate, we don't tend to articulate things in pitches as clearly as we ought to. Focus on the numbers, be very clear, keep it really simple. There are no different rules. Just do it as we're supposed to do it, and do it as well as you possibly can, and being authentically you. I think that's also really important. People want to see your true personality, so be absolutely you, and it's something that I'm really passionate about.
Yes, and I would say also that, I guess, goes into the theme of resiliency, right? Not just be confident about your content, but if you get knocked down, stand back up. This is just a small bump, be resilient and get back up and show them next time, right? So this is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today. I loved this discussion. Lots of content. We could have been here for 3 hours. Honestly, I think 30 minutes is too short. I wanted to thank the audience for tuning in. And if you haven't read the report already, you can access it via the QR code that's on the screen. I do hope that you join us for our next LinkedIn Live event. It's on July 13th, where we'll be speaking to male and female investors on the types of things that they're looking for when investing. So with that, that's wonderful. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciated it.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Great speaking.
Thank you.